Hello, fellow gamers. This is Tim, SamY7, and I darkened it up a bit so that I can show you the dungeon that I made today. I want to talk about an article that I read about a mega dungeon being a mythic underworld. And basically the gist of the article was that just because it doesn't follow like the reality that we're used to doesn't mean that it can't exist in the state that it does. So basically the mega dungeon has laws all to itself, that it's different from above ground, and it kind of brings in the flavor of basically the underworlds of different mythologies, and how it's kind of like an extrapolation of that. So it's almost like the dungeon itself is an NPC, and it's constantly fighting against the party. Doors don't open for them, but they open for the monsters at will. It's almost like the dungeon itself is fighting them. And that kind of makes sense with all the traps and things, but it kind of brings in that sort of supernatural element to it, that the dungeon is watching, the dungeon is listening. And that's kind of creepy. And I kind of like the idea that it's not just rooms and hallways and bricks and mortar, or caves, or delved out rooms, whatever the case may be, but that it's something more, that it's darker, it's scarier. It should make you more paranoid. I don't know. So I just sort of like that idea a lot, and some of the things that he came up with and was talking about, where, like I said, it's a place where the laws of reality bend, break, or just warp, and it just constantly fights against them. One of the things that's neat about the Mega Dungeon is that it should give a sense of just immensity, just this giant thing that has lots of emptiness in it. And I'm kind of a newbie to running a Mega Dungeon. I've designed a few over the years, but I've never actually ran them. And this will be my first attempt of running one. So I've been doing a lot of research, searching for different people's suggestions. And a lot of the old school blogs are great for that. And the fact that there should be lots of emptiness was something that kind of struck me as weird. I guess I'm not used to that with a smaller dungeon. Like, sure, you have empty rooms every once in a while, but if you had a lot of empty rooms, you'd almost that sounds like bad. That sounds like bad design. But what they were talking about was that empty space is good for regrouping, for healing, for resting up a bit between encounters. And I like that idea. I liked as well that just the emptiness itself is part of the setting. That yes, you are paranoid that there's things out there, but you get to the next room and there's nothing there. You go down a long hallway and you don't see anything. You don't hear anything, or maybe you hear things and don't see stuff. I like that a lot of the blogs are talking about just all the random senses and things that you can hear that should entice the players to continue on, to see what's going on. And there might be noises that don't really have a source, that just kind of emanate from the dungeon itself, almost like the dungeon's trying to entice you to your death. I like that idea. I like the idea that it follows its own rules, and just to kind of emphasize the supernatural, like bending, that it's a place of magic and evil. In my dungeon, I took an idea from the Echoes of Heaven setting, and in that setting, there's things called ulcers, which is basically where like a hellish underworld is bubbling up into the mortal plane. And I love that idea itself, and it also kind of emphasized a lot of these supernatural things, that the laws of physics aren't there all the time. Things are different. It's also kind of neat that with this mythic underworld kind of idea, that a mega dungeon really could be endless. It could go on forever, because that's how it was made by whoever made it. And I think leaving that as an enigma that's been in the past, like who actually made this? it should be there. But at the same time, they're talking about how the Mega Dungeon is not static, where like once it's made, that doesn't mean like okay, it's done now. The Mega Dungeon is never done. Those things that live in there can be digging more tunnels, or the Mega Dungeon itself, excuse me, could be making rooms, in sort of like that warping, like sort of low intelligence of the dungeon, kind of doing what it wants. Some of the vlogs also emphasize that politics can be involved in Mega Dungeon games, because there's more room and there's things that live in there all the time. So whenever you have any sort of cultures at all, they're probably going to be interacting with other cultures, other races, and a lot of these relationships are probably not so healthy. I'm sure there's lots of slave-master relationships between groups. I mean, anything's possible. And I think there's lots of role-playing opportunities for the party to sort of pit one power group against another. Maybe do favors for one and pretend like they're buddying up, and then later you can take them out once the bigger guy's dead, or whatever you guys want to do. It's sort of like the divide and conquer idea, and things like bribery. I mean, you got all kinds of gold on you. Why not use it to save your life? If you can bribe your way through a group of goblins, or trolls that like shiny gems or something. I don't know what you're going to be facing, but I think bribery is an option. It might not be the one that's taken all the time, but it's definitely there. And if you have more social characters, they can probably pull this off. And sometimes I'm sure you'll fail horribly, and you might die, but it might be an interesting idea to try to talk your way out of things. And I like in the old school games, especially like Labyrinth Lord and Swords and Wizardry, where gold is experience points. And for new players, that's kind of a weird concept. But basically, it kind of emphasizes that, fighting the monsters really isn't all there is. There's more to it. If you can figure out a way to outsmart the monsters and get around them, you essentially defeat the monsters without having to swing a sword, and you get the XP for the gold. So that's kind of a neat idea. And there's nothing wrong with GMs giving ad hoc experience points at the end of a level or end of a session. I think that's probably what I'll do in my game. The Labyrinth Lord game I'm going to be running it's only once a month, so it's kind of slow. So I'll probably be handing out more experience points than just fighting the monsters and getting gold. But just remember to describe everything. The five senses, the temperature of the rooms, what they look like. And as a GM, don't be afraid to change things up. Especially if you're going with the mythic underworld idea that, it could be anything. It could be, like, every room could be made in different ways. It could be colored in different ways. It could appear to be something and actually be something else. There's so many opportunities to make each room, each hallway memorable. And you want to try to at least have several places in the dungeon that your players are going to remember for years if you do it right. So that's pretty much mostly what I wanted to say, but I wanted to show you this now that I got the room all dark. This is Darves Hill. This is going to be my my dungeon here. And as you can see, this is the actual like topographical map, and I was going to do 14 layers, but I settled on 10. And as you can see, the different levels are edged in black. And as you lift these up, and I did this all in pen, so yeah, it took a while. I did some hatch work. But you can see the dungeon under each level of the hill. And I think this thing is pretty sweet. And there's buildings on the outside of it too, and they're all numbered. But like I said, you just lift this up, and you see each level of the dungeon. I guess there's a center right here. And some of them I have made differently than others. Some of them are similar. And I started using a little bit of color towards the bottom. That's where that ulcer idea I was talking about is kind of bubbling up through the dungeon. Kind of warping things around it. Then I made some green sort of underground rivers in this one and some caves. This one I actually had some runes kind of carved into built into the dungeon itself. I still have to do some coloring on this one. I think